Sugar and Spikes is a science-backed and semi-sarcastic mental health podcast for a new type of business leader. Mental health concerns are occasionally addressed, but this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any condition, mental, physical, metaphysical, or otherwise. That's a job for your doctor or therapist, not a podcast. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. Cause
that's where we're at right now.
Cause life is rough.
It is rough. It's been a moment.
But okay, it's been a moment since we've pulled cards to kind of
It's been a really long time
off.
since we did that.
Because I will say, you know what? Let's take a moment and celebrate and acknowledge the fact that we have been much more on point lately. Maybe not even the last couple ones. Like, the intros have been rough, but
as they always have.
Right? Oh my God, I was recording another one. Because I do multiple podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
I was recording something else and tried to do an intro and then it was just like, I can't, and had someone else do it. I was like, just nope. I'm done. But also that was because it was hot. This heat.
That's killer.
And
humidity.
I know. I'm a child of Orange County, but I moved to Portland because I'm not made for the heat.
Yeah.
But then I moved away from Portland because I'm not made for the rain. I'm just not made to be outdoors.
But then the weather here is crazy. Crazy.
There's that lightning strike.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, if you guys didn't see it on her stories.
These are the things you're missing out on my stories. Yeah,
right outside your window.
Yeah, and my whole house
that's
shook.
Terrifying.
My ears rang for a good 10-15 minutes.
Oh my
God. I felt the sound move throughout.
Was Pup just cowering in a corner?
He was already connected to me and just in my lap, and I think he goes to the space of I'm not here, I'm not here, I'm not here.
I'm not really here.
Yeah, I'm not really here. That's Atticus.
That's me sometimes too.
I know. Yeah, between the fireworks and the weather, my anxiety has been on high alert because it's unexpected sounds, and just with that, if we think scientifically and everything, our bodies kind of acclimate to always be what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's been not fun. All this is to say, the actual episodes
say nothing at all. All this is to say is that we're rambling with mics on.
I think this percentage, if we were to start over, this would be a good outtake episode.
That's true.
You know,
this is the stuff we cut so that you don't have to hear it.
Yeah, because we know we ramble enough as it is in the episodes.
I know,
but look at what we save you from.
I know.
Okay,
it's all about perspective.
All of this, if it gets left in or not, whatever. This is to say, we have been on point, and we really haven't done a good old fashioned card pool in a minute, where we read random affirmator cards, which I think are they have super fun art. So in order to kind of get us into the podcasting zone, Tammy and I both pulled a couple. Well, that's funny. And let's see. My one says joyful space.
Ooh.
Has your workspace slid from model of cleanliness to graveyard of mugs? Oh, this sounds like my downstairs. From Pinterest pic to Kathy cartoon, time to get a second job. The job of giving your surroundings a makeover. You may be chained to a desk. Sorry. Okay. You may be chained to a desk, but it's not a prison asterisk unless you work in a prison. I've done that. But even then, you're not a prisoner. That's true. Unless you are, in which case, sorry. Fair enough. You may be chained to a desk, but it's not a prison. Use your freedom of expression to make your space as joyful as you can. Ditch the clutter, hang some pics, sage the cubicle, spruce up your space, and you'll earn the excuse to be lazy and messy all over again. You know, I 100% agree with that. And I think anybody that knows me IRL knows that I'm that person almost to a fault.
Yeah.
Where things need to look like very presentable and very like organized, and I don't like having a lot of things in like counter spaces and stuff like that. Keep in mind, guys, I work from home, so yes, I have a home office, but also I work all throughout my house.
Well, and also this wasn't the original office. You
Right.
went so far to like change offices
Yeah,
in your house
yeah,
for a different look and vibe, and then I think you've rearranged the space 3
a
times.
couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like a good view when you can get it is always nice. And my old office faced my neighbors.
Right.
And now I actually like face the yard and some trees, which is lovely. But I mean, I think that pretty much
When you moved in here, how
Mhm.
did it feel different or the same?
Well,
Because it's like across the hall.
yeah,
Like it's not like a long way.
it's literally across the hall. I was excited to have more sunlight. Um, it's a very different shape of room.
Yeah.
Because my house is old and no, like, most houses nowadays have like square rooms and stuff.
Not you.
And every room in my house has a different geometrical shape.
It's true. It's true.
Some of them aren't even squares or rectangles, guys. But yeah, so that helped. I brought in like all of my old furniture, so it has like the same vibe, I guess.
Well, but you did this to the wall and you changed this up.
Yeah, I realized that in my old office, I really was trying to be like Pinterest perfect and very like bright and airy and cheery and no bad vibes, all that stuff.
But we know.
Yeah, like I was really like I was very much, I don't want to say trying to mimic things that I saw online, but I was going for something that wasn't necessarily as true to me. I don't know. My old office had like no hint of goth.
That's true.
You know, like there was no like darkness.
Like, but there were elements of you in it.
Yeah.
This just seems in your new space like a refined you.
Yeah, I put a darker wall up,
Mm-hmm.
which is nice. If you guys if you follow my stories, like you've seen like the flower wall. We may be doing video soon, so you guys will see it. Tammy's glaring at me. I think we should do video.
Yeah? Why?
Because it gives folks a different way to interact with us, to relate with us. Like, what if you tried to do therapy just over the phone? Like, think about how much information you lose.
That's true. That's why I don't like phones.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you're fine with an audio podcast.
I know. Who knew?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot that could be done with video. And I mean, if you want to get into like the marketing piece, 90% of the internet's going to be video in like 18 months.
Yeah.
So, you know, hashtag trending.
Okay. Because that's what I do.
I
follow trends.
Wasn't I just talking about how I moved my office to not be so trendy? But
we're all just contradictions.
Oh my God. I mean, I think like knowing when the trend is useful versus harmful, right?
Oh, totally.
Same thing with knowing when like the behavior is useful versus harmful.
Well, and also like automatically rejecting a trend is just as crazy as automatically accepting it.
That is being a 13-year-old girl.
Right.
Like, I'm not doing that. Everyone else is. I mean,
yeah, but what if you so it doesn't really, when you do things like that, when you're like people do the exact opposite of what people tell them to do, that's because they don't want to be controlled.
I know somebody like that.
In air quotes. Yep. Then they're actually being controlled.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
yeah.
And I'm sure people have heard this before. I don't know that this is new, but like, you're like, oh, I'm just not going to do what you say. Even if I wanted to do it in the first place, now I'm just going to do the opposite. So you're always at the mercy of like the other person's the things they say, the things they want, right?
Or like in business and stuff, like especially when you're in that state of like starting a brand and everything, like, well, I don't want to be like everyone else. Like you and I, God, how many hours and days and weeks did we spend on like, I don't want the logo to look like everybody else and we need to stand out and
Be true to ourselves.
But we also need to be like professional and just all of these things. And I've seen it so often on like in various communities where people are like, I want to call my business this, but I'm scared to because it just sounds so much the same. Like, for one, so what? Like, to your point, like,
There's fear of getting lost in the crowd,
Mhm.
and there's fear of standing out for the wrong reasons.
but if it's
Right?
something that feels good, like if your only reason for not doing something, and I went through this specifically with like color and everything when we were developing action and attitude, was because everyone else is, so I'm not. Um, that that's like being controlled by the masses,
Yeah,
you
and also
know?
doesn't necessarily connect with who you authentically are.
Mhm.
So just rejecting something out of hand, like what if okay, going back to the skills closet,
Mhm.
like what if somebody's like, here's a jumpsuit and you're like, fuck that trend. I'm
Mhm.
not wearing a jumpsuit, blah blah
Yeah.
blah. And so, but what if you tried it on and
Mhm.
you're like, okay, I don't really like it,
Mhm.
but if I did this to it, oh, hey, I like it.
Yeah.
So, like, you can take an idea
Mhm.
and tweak it to
Mhm.
make it your own,
Yeah.
but just rejecting things doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily, it's not necessarily like rebellion in the sense that look how independent I am. It's
Mhm.
more like look how reactionary I am, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean another way to look about this, and we talk about it we talk about it a bit in the book, is rejecting something because it's been done before
Hmm.
and everything. And I think for one, the most solid fact is there's nothing new. Like
There's new ways to spin it.
there's new ways to spin things and everything, which, that's where your personality and your perspective comes into play. But like, especially if we think about like the skills closet and stuff, like in business and everything, like classics and basic strategies, basic things are classics for a reason. Like a
Right.
plain white tee has stood the test of time for a reason.
Right.
You know, it's what you do with it, like you were saying, that really like brings it into like the modern age and, lets it work for the situation. Um, I think this was one of the biggest things I think I've really learned throughout my 20s is just because it's been done before, if I were to do it, it doesn't mean that I'm copying.
Yeah.
It means like I'm joining the conversation.
Yeah. It's not a shot for shot remake.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know if that made sense to
But
anyone
it's like
out
more in
there.
the spirit of it,
Yeah.
because it's true. It's really difficult to have a completely new out of the box idea.
Yeah.
Like sometimes there's no need to reinvent the wheel.
Mhm.
You can take the things that are already out there and
Mhm.
be like, well, what if we did it this way, which
Yeah.
feels more authentic? And then it's great.
Yeah.
But this fear when you start something new, especially as an entrepreneur, right, is like, I don't want to stand out for the wrong reasons, and I
Mhm.
don't want to be a sheep because then no one will see me.
Mhm.
So you're really out there on the ends of the extremes when
Mhm.
really it's probably more in the middle.
Mhm.
And how do you bring in your like expectations and
Mhm.
your ability to look at things in a new way
Mhm.
to kind of repurpose them or rebrand them, or
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
taking it's like taking a coping skill, which is like a template,
Mhm.
and then making it your own. Like, what tweaks do you have to
Like a
make?
pattern?
Like a pattern.
Yeah.
Hey.
Guys, we have a book coming out. It's going to be really good.
But it's like, how do you make it your own, right? Like, no,
Mhm.
like the way you and I use, so like we've talked about it too, like it's the framework, but you
Mhm.
provide the details, right?
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of ways you can talk about this
Mhm.
that make it make more sense.
Oh my god, so this is actually really interesting. I've been playing around with mindfulness, which, shocker, such a new trend, right? Mindfulness. But like this past week or so, I've really been challenging myself around the idea of like, well, what is mindfulness? Does it have to be a breathing exercise? Does it have to be X, Y, or Z? Um, and really just like trying to figure out kind of like new ways and really reminding myself that mindfulness is essentially like whatever I want it to be,
Yeah.
so long as like it's in the moment.
Right.
Like that still counts.
Yeah.
Has been really interesting because it showed like I've learned like I can have this skill set that I use every day, but I'm not doing the same thing
Right.
every day, which I think we've talked about it before and everything, but I think I've learned it on a different level. And I've really been playing with this idea of habits lately. And I think I've been talking about it, but with July, like we're in July 5th. So I just happened to be thinking about it and I realized that July 1st, like I was working on my planner and everything on July 1st. So I'm trying out this habit tracker, which I've talked so much about how like I don't like habits. I don't like having to commit to doing like one thing day in and day out.
Right.
But having these like categories of things,
Okay.
but then being fluid with what that looks like has been kind of a game changing and more empowering and motivating almost.
Right. So you learn that like having a habit doesn't necessarily mean like you're robotically doing the same thing every day.
Exactly. Which
Like here's my exact routine, like
yeah.
coffee, then lunch, then this, then
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Like, yeah, I think that's totally right. A habit is different from a routine, and a routine also doesn't have to be like, to your point, robotic. You know, because one thing that I've realized is I need like time blocking, not in the I'm going to spend 2 hours writing type of thing, but like I have a section of my morning for myself before I start work, and then a chunk of my day is work, and then there's like room for mindfulness and like personal development, like reading and listening to a podcast and everything, as a form of I don't have a commute, so this is my commute to disconnect.
Yeah.
And then I go into my evening. Like I have general times, but so I do have a schedule when I've been the person that's been like, I hate schedules.
No more schedules.
I'm done with that. But it helps. So I think also to this idea of like fighting back and pushing back on ideas, we also need to be challenging ourselves on why are we fighting back or pushing back on ideas? Because you can get caught in the, well, I just don't do that.
Right. But like who decided, right?
Yeah.
Who decided you didn't do that?
Well, and
right? Like,
yeah.
You did.
Yeah. And the second that it stops working, because I started to notice that pushing back against it, it wasn't doing great things. Like I wasn't happy with where I was. So, okay, well, what can I do to like, I'm not happy with the situation. Like I came to this idea of like even playing with the schedule because I was like, I'm not happy with how things are going.
Yeah.
What's something I could try? And I really had to work through the, well, I don't like schedules. Okay. And
how could
you're
you
not
tweak
happy?
it?
Like you don't like this right now either.
Yeah.
So
what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Right. I love that idea of like, who decided those things? Like, I'm just a person who doesn't do that. Cause like you and I were talking about that, like in regards to style, right? And a certain stylist would be very proud of me because I said to you, I'm like, you know what? I found myself thinking, well, I don't wear skirts or I don't do that.
Yeah.
But who says? Like me.
Yeah.
I say. So I also can change my mind.
Exactly.
I can change that piece of me and kind of grow, right? And maybe I would really enjoy it. And then I found out, ding, 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 I did. So, and it's helped me kind of move forward with a style, like a personal style that's more like who I am.
Yeah.
And so that was your example, but my example too. And I think both of them work,
Yeah.
right? Like we decide who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Those are our decisions, even if we unconsciously made them.
Yeah.
And so we have the power to change our minds.
Well, like, not only do we have the power to change our minds, but the person that decided those things, you're different than that
Mhm.
person. Even if that decision was yesterday, like, you're now a different person.
Yeah.
Like, thinking about the style piece, I, for years, like, the high slit, like, swimsuits and, like, high-rise pants and stuff have been super trendy, and I've been like, "Oh god, no."
Right.
But then recently I've tried a couple of them. I'm like, God, these make my legs look 10 miles long. Like, hi,
Yeah.
what's up?
That outfit you showed me, I was like, oh my God, that looks magical on you.
So, thank you.
You're welcome. Post pictures.
But it's like that, just as like a physical example, like my body's different than it was, when I was like 17 or whatever and thought, oh God, no, and it's just.
And you've grown as a person. Not even just
Exactly.
with your body. Like, you're not necessarily the person you were when you decided
Yeah.
those things, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like I have a different level of confidence and a different like even the vibe that I'm going for. Like things may have looked exactly the same and I see something completely different. You're right. Yeah. So yeah, all of this is to add you can change your mind. And in one respect, it's almost not even necessarily changing your mind. It's stepping into like where you are in the moment.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
I think there's so much stigma around, well, like going back and forth on decisions and changing your mind and all these things. And we've talked a bit about that. And oh boy, do we talk about it in the book in terms of like consistency.
Right. And feeling like once I've made a decision, I'm just fucking committed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I will say, I think like in regards to consistency, if you're being transparent about things, that's your golden thread of consistency.
Right.
Like in terms of like business and stuff, like I feel like we do a good job, especially on the podcast, of saying this is kind of where we are right now. Like we're going to focus more on business and things like that. And that's been something that Tammy and I've been playing around with recently of do we want to spread back out into more of like this lifestyle thing? Because lifestyle is really hard to do. Like from a business perspective, lifestyle is hard as fuck to do.
Well, yes.
Like,
Yes. For
Because-
many reasons.
yes.
Yes.
And maybe a bit conceited, but I'm like, I think we could.
Maybe we could try it.
Exactly.
And see.
Yeah. So, but
Because we are not the people we were when we decided to step away.
yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Or like when we decided to really hone in on the business thing,
Yeah.
we've had more experiences. We're in a different situation. The brand looks different, which I will say, this is just kind of more of a side tangent than where we already are. But so often people will ask either online or they'll even like message me because apparently one thing that we have done well is build a good brand.
Yay.
Go us.
Go us.
Which is good because it's kind of like my profession.
I know. I'm just like, woohoo.
So good, it's successful. But the question is, well, do I use my name? Do I use a business name and everything? And I will say
On your socials, you mean?
in terms of like LLCs and
yeah. Okay.
because I talk with a lot of like coaches and like solo entrepreneurs and stuff, and it's like, do I want to have a business name? Do I want to?
Yeah,
like
big questions.
Yeah. One of the best things I think that we ever did was operate under a brand.
Yeah.
Versus kind of our personal names, or coming up with something like less fluid. Because Sugar and Spikes, we can shift it to be what we want it to be.
Right.
Whereas, like, especially for like solo entrepreneurs, I mean, I guess in one way we kind of did need to have a name besides just our names. But if you build something, especially as an influencer and stuff like that, if you build something and it's your name, that's really fucking hard to sell.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's really hard to either sell as like an exit strategy, and it's really hard to kind of shift,
Yeah,
you know?
it's true. It doesn't leave a lot of flexibility.
Yeah. Um so that's I forget where I was going. Oh yes, we were talking about shifting into like more of a lifestyle thing. And
Mhm.
the golden thread that we've had throughout this whole podcast is we've been honest, transparent, and you guys know pretty much exactly where we stand almost to the week.
Yeah, it's true.
You're on the with this crazy ride with us.
Hey, if we're nothing if not authentic about it,
exactly.
right?
Which has been one of the biggest things that's helped build the brand.
Yeah.
Like this idea of authenticity, because it's not a brand isn't about this like ideal, it's about connection.
Yeah.
People want to interact with things that they trust,
Mm-hmm.
and if there's no authenticity behind something, then there's no trust.
Right. Well, and I think it's easier for us to like turn on a mic and have conversations we would be having anyway. So like if we think about that, then there's no other way to be other than
Mhm.
authentic, because we're just having, I mean, basically they're just listening to us anytime like we're in the same room together.
Mhm.
These are the kinds of things that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I know we had done some other things that, anyway, in the beginning,
Mhm.
that sounded not like that.
Yeah.
And so I think like when you try too hard, it doesn't come across as authentic, and like you
Mhm.
just have to find the way to work, like framework and details, right?
Mhm.
So like you have to find what works for you.
Yeah.
And I think that if we had gone any other way, trying to force this, like
Mhm.
having an outline or like we're going to
Mhm.
do this and this and this, like that's not who we are, and that's
Yeah.
not what we're about, and those aren't the conversations that we naturally have.
Right.
And so if we try and force it into that box because
Mhm.
that's how podcasts are supposed to do it and that's
Mhm.
how it runs best, then you would lose some of that intangible, like I like listening to these two
Mhm.
women speak about stuff.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think like there's definitely a bit of privilege in what our podcast is, and I think like for folks who are in corporate and stuff, the authenticity piece is a bit harder to navigate.
Yeah.
But I think there's also like we both work full-time jobs in a very professional environment.
Yeah.
There are ways to be authentic and to develop relationships and still be professional.
Oh yeah.
And I think a big part of that is making sure you're on the right, I don't want to say right, but on a path that feels
Good.
good to you.
Yeah.
You know, like whatever you do, I don't like to say should, but whatever you're doing,
We hope.
I would hope you're able to lose track of time
Mm.
in your position.
Mhm.
You know, like
Use your gifts and creativity and your strengths.
yeah, and I would hope like you do find yourself thinking about, well, how can I improve? How can things be better at work? Like I will say like in your off time, because we don't have like those black and white boundaries and pillars.
Yeah.
Like I don't think you should be obsessing about it, but I mean,
But like if this
there's got to be like a level of like investment and connection to fuel it.
yeah.
So
And
yeah.
I mean, when people don't have that, they're
Mhm.
not happy in their jobs,
Mhm.
right? Like even if you have a corporate job, if it isn't something that connects to you in a bigger sense, you're
Mhm.
going to get tired of it. Like it's going to
Exactly.
be like I'm fucking over this. And just like I mean, not to bring up like past things that we've already talked about, but even when we first started grad school
Mhm.
and we were about to go into first year clinicals, you were like, "No,
Yeah.
I can't do this."
Mhm.
And if
It
you
goes back to changing your mind.
right.
Mhm.
And you could have kept going because that
Mhm.
probably would have been at that point in time, not
Mhm.
later, but at that point in time, the easier thing to do, right? You
Mhm.
just move on with your cohort and keep doing what you're doing.
Mhm.
But you actually were like, no, this
Mhm.
is not, I've been dreaming of this since forever and now I'm
Mhm.
here and I don't want it.
Mhm.
Right. And like, for me, it was kind of letting go of the idea of I want to work with this specific population of
Mhm.
clients and recognizing that I just wasn't there anymore. I wasn't,
Mhm.
and that ended up not being what I wanted to focus on. And so being
Mhm.
able to change my mind in that way and you be able to change your mind in the way you did,
Mhm.
and find a program that really connected more with like your love of marketing
Mhm.
and all of that. Whereas I am better in like one-on-one therapeutic situations. And so
Mhm.
that was a better fit for me.
Mhm.
And so I think that that is a really good, like, illustrative example of all the concepts we've kind of talked about today.
Mhm. And I think like even I wonder if we should have I'm thinking of someone very specific. I wonder if we need to have someone on the podcast to talk about like when do you know it's time to change like professionally?
Oh, yeah.
That could be really good, like talking about changing your mind in terms of like your career, because that's
Mhm.
terrifying. So that could be a good episode.
It could be.
But also I think of when I did change programs and everything, it was interesting because when we think of like personal brand, and a personal brand is something that you have whether you work in corporate, whether you're an entrepreneur, it's something that every single person has, especially today in regards to social media. Anyways, I'm not going down that rabbit hole. Everyone has it. Changing from that program to another program in grad school was still in line with my brand
Yeah.
because in fact it played it up more because I was able to use like my creativity and really like shift to these other values that meant a lot to me, and I was able to enhance those strengths versus kind of rolling with what I would say maybe like were my A- skills and values.
Well, and you think about it, like, what if you just do I don't play the what if game very
Mhm.
often. I don't think that's a good road to go down, but
Mhm.
think about this. What if you had done what I did and I had done what you did?
Mm.
So I drop the doctorate and go
Mhm.
into the master's program, and you keep going,
Mhm.
and we're on kind of exactly the same path but in opposite roles.
Mhm.
I don't think you would be happy, and I know I wouldn't be happy.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I've played out the what if I had gotten my doctorate,
Yeah.
and aside from the industry that I'm in for a full-time job, I'd I'd probably be like doing the same exact thing,
Mhm.
like in terms of like side stuff and like goals, and just I'd be reading the same things. I'd be very much like almost the same person.
Mhm.
Um just it would have taken me significantly more debt. And I don't know if
Yep.
the doctorate would have helped, other than me, instead of saying I have 2 masters, I'd say I have a doctorate, you know?
Yeah.
And for writing and making content and everything, yeah, that makes some difference, but also I can publish a book just as you can publish a book, like just as we can. Like
Yeah.
I'm not there's nothing in my like career or passion where I'm like, God, I need to be licensed to do that.
Right.
So all this to say,
Well, no. So kind of what I meant was like you said it's like your A- kind of skill
Mhm.
set, and what you do is kind of my A- kind of skill
Mhm.
set, right? So let's say
like the secondary, yeah,
because we both have MBAs, and you have
Mhm.
a master's in a specific part of psychology, and
Mhm.
I have a doctorate in psychology. So we're
Mhm.
basically about the same, give or take.
Mm.
But if I was in like my A-, B level skills, and
Mm.
my A- and B like interests, then I wouldn't be as happy as I am right now.
Mhm.
And you, let's say you're doing your A-, B skills,
Mhm.
wouldn't be as happy as you are right now.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right. So it doesn't
Yeah.
mean you don't have the ability to do it, the
Mhm.
talent to do it. It doesn't mean that. But being a psychologist
Mhm.
fulfills me
Mhm.
in a way that working in business would not.
Yeah.
And being in business fulfills you in a way that being in mental health would not.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think like the point I was trying to make, and I don't know if it was clear, was like we will find our path whether or not we change our mind like earlier in the game or later in the game.
Yeah, that's true.
Like I think that like all things held equal, sugar and spikes would still be a thing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Like that's what like I would have still been like, psych isn't my thing, but I would have had a doctorate in it instead of
A master's. Yeah.
like there are just some things, and this is both professional and personal, where there's going to be a shift, because the thing is when I was at PCC, I talked about shifting to marketing.
Oh, really?
Like it wasn't like it was from out of the blue. Like
right.
it was
like,
something
okay,
that,
I'm done.
yeah, it was something that I had thought about like a lot. And even in high school and stuff, it was like I was 99% on I'm going to be a psychologist, but I was also like, but if I weren't going to do that, I would do this.
Yeah.
Like there was always this like thing in the back of my brain. So I think that with certain things we know, but we just don't want to acknowledge until
we just are choosing not to go down that path
Exactly.
for whatever reason. We feel tied to these other things that we're doing. And that's not even necessarily a mistake.
right.
Like, I don't think that the experiences you had in grad school were in any way a mistake. I think
No.
it just brought clarity to like, this really isn't my heart and passion the way I thought it would be. And so I'm going to try this other thing that has kind of just been hanging around like, hey, I'm still here.
Yeah.
And like, I'm going to give that a try. And then you're like, oh yeah, okay, I get why this wasn't working for me. You know?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
yeah.
I think the message I want to send folks off, like, maybe we're wrapping up. I don't know.
We have no idea.
But one thing I would hope people get from this is just because you haven't changed your mind yet doesn't mean you can't. Like, it's not too late.
Yeah.
And if you choose to not, it doesn't mean that you can't at a later date.
Yep. True.
That's where that grad school story ends.
Well, I'm thinking now, I never said what my card was. So
take the whole episode.
Here we go.
Hold on. Before we get into that, can we acknowledge we got to hear from talking about Office Space?
Like you do.
Just gonna leave that there for everyone to think about. Okay, continue.
Okay. So just remember this. I'm a valuable member of my team and I bring a unique component to this job. I will not accept any self-conscious doubts about whether or not I belong here, and all inner questions about my own worth must be submitted in writing and then subsequently burned in a tire fire.
Nice.
So remember, friends, you have value, and the unique things that you bring to whatever it is you're doing are amazing, and keep doing that.
Well, I think that that's actually a really good addition to this idea of changing, especially if we're talking like changing careers or changing business focuses, because so often, and this was something I really got caught in the further I got into grad school, was, well, I have all this experience. Like,
so I'm going down that road.
Yeah.
Because it's too hard to switch. Who am I to be saying this is my exit?
Well, and what value would I bring like to a marketing team?
Right.
With like however many
all
years.
The mental health
with
experience.
All the mental health experience. Although, I mean, people be crazy wherever you are. But that was something that I really had to kind of figure out, was this idea of my experiences do bring a very valuable and different perspective into this new field.
Yeah.
You know, so I think it's really easy to be like, well, I'm just starting over. No, you're not just starting over. You're pivoting. Your brand is pivoting. All these things are kind of shifting. You're not like showing up on day one with no knowledge of the universe, you know?
And without experiences that have gotten you to where you are, right? So this idea of starting over, I see this very often with clients who struggle with substance use. And so they may have a lapse or a relapse, let's say, I don't know, 6 weeks into treatment or something like that. And then I have to have conversation of like, you're not starting over. Yes, you may be counting days over, but if you look at where you started from, you're definitely not at the starting line. And so where are you, and how can you learn from this, and how can you take the skills and the unique knowledge that you've gained and continue to move forward in your recovery? So I know that's really kind of off the topic of business, but I think it's a really good clear-cut example of like, you're not starting over. You're starting from here.
Yeah.
And you didn't lose all the things you learned before.
Exactly.
So anyway.
Well, and it plays into like what we were talking about earlier of you're not the same person you were yesterday, you know? So yeah, like you're not starting over. You're waking up with a new person with these experiences, and now is a new chance.
Right.
You know?
Or even going back to the clothes example, I am not the person I was when I decided I don't wear skirts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that person anymore.
Exactly.
And I'm this person, and this person actually likes it.
Yeah.
So, a lot of different examples to choose from because we like to provide
Mm-hmm.
lots of ways to understand.
We try to connect the dots, guys. We really do.
And you know, it's so funny. I was going home and listening to a podcast the last time I left your house, and I remember texting you. I'm like, guess what I just learned on this podcast?
Mm-hmm.
And you were like, what? I'm like, change isn't linear. And you're like, huh, I wonder where I've heard that before. Right? So sometimes also it takes a shift in perspective to realize that this thing that you're using over here applies here too.
Exactly.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh yeah, I don't know why I wasn't thinking of this that way,
Yeah.
but it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway.
No, that makes so much sense. And I've been thinking about that in terms of like the health and fitness industry versus kind of like what we talk about in business. And it's made me realize like why so many bodybuilders and stuff like do those motivational speeches at leadership conferences and everything. Because the same idea is really, really tied together
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like keep going when you don't want to. You have to like growth will hurt. Like when you're
change is
training.
hard.
Yeah. Like, and show up, like, you have to show up to work when you don't want to show up to work. Just like, if you're gonna work out on a consistent basis, you will have to go to the gym when you do not want to go to the gym.
Or you're going to have a bad workout.
Yeah. Like, these same concepts really overlap. And I think that's one of the bigger issues in our culture. And I need to stop because I'm opening up something that says that's one of the bigger issues with our culture. But really it's this idea of like, well, I know these lessons from this category and I know these lessons from this category and never the two shall meet. But really, our lives are so integrated. I feel like that's where we end up on every episode. Our lives are just so integrated and we are one person doing a million different things.
Yeah.
We are one person. We're all individual people.
I knew what you meant. I knew what you meant. And I was kind of going off in my own head about like, I'm not even going to say it. It's not even applicable.
But it's like, it also kind of goes back to role theory and being actors and showing up for one thing versus the next when really we're the same person.
Yeah. So like creating silos, right?
Yes.
Okay, I am going to share my example.
Okay, do
I know. I swear to God, they're going to be like another fucking mental health example. Like
that's why we have this podcast.
But anyway,
yes.
So very often, substance use treatment and mental health treatment are considered divorced from each other,
which is bullshit.
We're not the same clinicians. We don't see the same people. And I'm like, nope, fucking, I call bullshit on that.
Yeah,
I call total BS on that.
Sit down.
Because we're not like treating a piece of a person.
Right.
Like, oh, I only do this piece. I don't see people who use substances. I'm like, no, you probably do.
Yeah.
I'm like, no. So it's this idea of like artificially like piecing out, like I learned this lesson from this piece of my life and I've learned a lesson from this piece of my life and it applies in this role and this one applies in this role. And you're right. They don't meet. They're like across a fucking canyon. But really we're talking about one person and intersectionality. We need to stop. But that idea of, you said culture, it's your fault.
I know I did.
This idea of like, everything's intersectional. So the way we experience things and know things is through our unique intersections with the world.
Yeah.
And so like sometimes it takes someone of saying someone another way or saying something another way to be able to say, oh yeah, that connects with this piece over here. And I wasn't thinking about that.
Yeah, I think it's, and I don't want this to come off as like railing against categories or, you know, social pockets.
Okay.
Or like sectionalized identities. Because that also gives us ways to connect with people. Like,
yeah.
I'm thinking like, I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but like social media profiles and what so many people teach is like know your niche and blah, blah, blah. And like, well, I was thinking like, well, what's the benefit with that? Like while you were talking like in terms of intersectionality. Anyways, my thoughts are, if I were to like express myself, if I were to redo my Instagram like profile which I'm not, but if I were, it would be like marketing, mental health, something else like not fitness junkie, but like I don't know,
kinda,
yoga girl,
you are.
something. Like that gives you an insight into how I interact with the world. And I'm like, I'll talk with a marketing consultant with a different language than I will talk with you
Mm-hmm.
because we share multiple languages.
Right.
But like I'll talk with a marketing consultant different than I'll talk with someone I see at the gym versus, so like knowing these things about ourselves is good.
It's essential.
It's essential because it helps us communicate with others for how we navigate life, and it gives folks a starting point.
Yeah.
Because we need to fill in the blanks for people so they can start to like develop an actual relationship. And
Or figure out
I don't want to.
Yes, no.
Yeah, like this person is not for me. So those are good, and the danger is when we stay siloed.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this actually a lot in terms of there are some things going on in Fort Wayne where it's very business oriented, but it's also churchy.
Yeah.
And I've been like, I kind of want to go, but they're church people. So there's a little bit of a bias there. But at the same time, like as I'm thinking through, I'm like, is that a necessary like silo or are there good connections and like would I meet people that I would actually connect with anyways?
But also informed by your past experience, right? But that is all to say, like going back to the skirt example, the person I was when I decided I didn't wear skirts is not the person I am now. So the person you were with those experiences is not the person you are now. And so being able to maybe move forward with a sense of like, okay, I'm going to keep this in the background. I know what I've learned, but now I'm going to see if those lessons still hold true.
Exactly.
And like being curious and like leaning into the discomfort. I'm pretty sure we've said this before. But yeah, really leaning in when things get uncomfortable. And that can be hard to do. But I've always found that when I do it, I really get something valuable out of the experience.
Yeah. It's either like you learn a really solid, like, yes, that's awesome, or still not for me and here's why.
Or those lessons were still true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I would agree with all of that.
Right? So like, and even the way, we're way off topic.
Started with Office Space, you guys.
So the way we teach children, this was talking about something totally different, but the way we teach children and the way we have to teach children is like distinct categories, right? Like, I don't even want to, whatever. This is black and this is white. But really, but then as you grow, when you can think in more flexible and nuanced ways, you have to also think about those categories in more flexible and nuanced ways.
Yeah.
Like, how many fucking colors of white are there? So many.
Yeah.
So many. And like, so it's up to us as adults to recognize like categories are broad and being adult means we add the nuance.
Yeah.
That's
such a good example. Like thinking about picking out paint for like your house and everything. Like you don't just go to like, do I want red, orange, yellow, green, blue, or purple?
Right.
Like you don't think of like those basic rainbow colors. You walk into a store with multiple walls of
green
paint colors.
I'm like, I want green. Oh my
Which green do you want?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Nuance. Right?
And at the same time, knowing, well, I tend to like this color family helps narrow it down.
Right. So maybe we should stop.
Yeah.
It's been a long one. It's been a long and strange trip today.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Thanks for joining us.
Sticking with us through it all.
Next week will be even better, I promise.
I bet today was good.
Oh, I actually think this is probably one of the better ones we've done in a long time.
Well, I think
got really good really fast.
I mean, I think it's a very authentic example of where our minds go if we're just given, like, I remember right before we started, I might have even said it after we started, like, free association. Like, let's do some free association and see where it goes. And this is where it went.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I could continue on.
Me
but-
too. As we will,
Mm-hmm.
but not
Next
now.
week.
Next week.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, friends.